and welcome to this episode of Top Deck Thoughts. Now, just for the record, this is more going to be kind of a live blog-ish since I'm kind of talking about my perspective, my Top Deck Thoughts, about a current daily weekly MTG stream that just happened recently. Lucky enough, I was going to try to get this recorded as quick as possible, and then get Crow to try to edit it, to try to get this out as soon as possible. For the record, Crow, thank you for doing this. Much obliged. Anyway, let's talk about what happened today. So, today was finally the day where we got the stream that talked about the MTG Arena Economy. And I'm going to give props where props due. Blake, the PR guy for Wizards who does these streams and helps essentially explain what's going on essentially within WotC as well as with Arena, he did a pretty good job of trying to bring one of the people who worked on it, the producer of Arena and such, and essentially explain their overall design philosophies, as well as try to address the potential concerns that we have with the economy. I'll go for the cliff notes of this, and I'll go from my perspective. For those who don't have a lot of time, the quick two notes: there's some things I agree that they did, there's some things I don't agree with. That's the basic summary of it. But in all due respect. Anyway, so what they did is they pretty much started off by just essentially talking about their overall general design philosophy of Arena, kind of like as well as also the potential economics of Arena and how they want people to do card acquisition and such. Essentially kind of like how they expect people to play the game from a new player to also an experienced player perspective. Then they kind of addressed one of our first concerns, which one of them was the quote-unquote kind of semi-trickiness of being a collector and such, as well as just trying to get a deck done, especially with wildcard acquisition when you try to open a lot of packs and such. And this is where they essentially go with a really cool idea, and then an idea that was kind of I think it's the best way I'm going to phrase it, but let me explain. One of the methods that they first explained to essentially regarding to pretty much a card collection acquisition with wildcards and such, because for people who are more experienced into the game, you do kind of get to that point where you essentially you open enough boosters and such, so you just get gems constantly and such when you really just want to get that specific mythic or specific kind of like rare and such. Mostly mythics though, if we're being blunt. And they are introducing, within Neo apparently, Neon Dynasty, they are going to be introducing a kind of like a extended pack essentially that's going to cost a little bit more gold than usual. Like normal pack's 1,000, this one's going to cost like 1,300, so 1,300 essentially. And what this one is going to do, it's going to be a pack that is going to have a guaranteed mythic, or at the very least, a guaranteed rare or mythic wild card. I do think this is a nice little compromise, at least within the realm of the card acquisition. It helps with players who are kind of like grinders like myself, who do grind for gold and such, and essentially just being able to use that gold to guarantee a mythic or a specific wild card to help build up our collection. That's a really great approach. I do think that was a really well-designed idea. I like that approach. The second one, and this is more the one where I'm kind of in the realm of disagreement, I will say, is their wildcard bundle. First of all, it's kind of cool that they're doing a wildcard bundle. So, like, if you're trying to finish up a specific deck, you need a specific set of rare and mythic wildcards. They are going to, starting Streets of New Capenna, introduce a wildcard bundle, which is going to be a bundle that's going to contain 4 mythic wildcards and 12 rare wildcards. And that sounds good at first glance until you hear the price. So, the price that they announced this bundle, it's going to be $49.99. Or, for those who don't know, with tax rounding and all that stuff, that's pretty much around $50-ish for 16 wildcards. Okay. There was a lot of response to this, and it's safe to say that the backlash of this specific piece of news was a understatement. Because $50 for 16 wildcards is pretty silly. I'm just not gonna lie. Yes, technically, when you look at the math perspective, you are technically from getting more quote-unquote straight wildcards than you would if you open a booster pretty much bundle or booster bots essentially from Arena wildcards. True, but you do have to consider the fact that you get pretty much full progress as well as rares and commons that you didn't had from technically when you open those technically boosters by themselves. So, like, there's probably some hard math I'm not accounting for and such, but it just felt like $50 for that amount of wild cards seems ridiculously steep. And the part of me that's a little bit concerned is I think that's more of... Okay, I have kind of like two angles of this. There's one angle where I think it's more just a cautious design because they're worried that they are going to essentially... If they make it so efficient that you just only want to buy wild cards, then maybe they're worried that people won't be playing their events and such, or play limited or such. Which then leads to the question, then if we don't really want to play the game or play the events, then why would we want to buy the wild cards in the first place? And I mean, I understand kind of like the play architecture and such, and they wanted to not, quote-unquote, do that, as well as potentially cause less incentive to buy the pre-order bundles and such. I kind of get it from that angle. There's also the one slightly cynical aspect of it, and I will admit this is a little bit cynic of me of even approaching it like this. Part of me wonders if this was intentionally supposed to be steep price just to essentially say that, hey, we provide you the option, but obviously once we go for the 6-week period, which they said in their article that's going to go through a 6-week period before they quote-unquote ended and such for experimentation purposes, there's the little cynic in me that's like going to be like, well, we did provide that solution, and well, we got the 6 weeks of data, not many people bought it. It wasn't a good solution, so let's just go back to this old solution. This solution that we know that people are accommodated to and are used to. Which, if that is the case... that is sketchy as heck. I don't think that is the case. I do think this is one of those scenes where they are more in the experimental grounds and they are trying to essentially experiment the boundaries of this. And I do think they want to be a little bit cautious. But I do think it's one of those scenes that, keep in mind, if we're at the point where we're asking for wildcards, it's just because we want to try to build a deck, either for a content creator to try to build a deck to play on the ladder and show a deck off, or just essentially if we're wanting to finalize a deck and get it to its final kind of like conclusion, if we want to bring it to like maybe a competitive event on Arena and such. So I think the price can definitely be lower. Like, I would say you could probably make it like 35, even 20-ish if you want to, and then maybe make it like a $5 extra convenience fee for the fact that you don't have to open a bunch of boosters now and such to essentially be able to build your decks and such. Like, it can be quite debated, but yeah, $50 is ridiculously too steep for that. It's like ridiculously absurd. Besides that, they did talk about a couple of quality of life updates that they are going to be introducing. One of them is that coming soon will be the fact that you can select your own lands, which is really nice, like your favorite lands and such, so we don't have to scroll through a bunch of basic lands and then to get our specific favorite one. And apparently with this technology, this is actually going to have some ways of doing duplicate protection when we have like extra rare cards of kind of like the whole, you have 8 favorite passages within your collection, stuff like that. So apparently this is going to resolve that. How? We didn't really get the details and such, so that is kind of left to be determined. So it's kind of nice to know that we got that. However, then we also were asking questions, and one of the questions was, are we going to get a dusting system? Since the dusting system is a very popular feature within card games and such. Hearthstone, Legends of Runeterra, etc., etc. And the basic premise that they went with is like, no, and they kind of use a really interesting set of words that they felt like, and I get where they're coming from with this word choice. They're kind of worried about people dusting their cards, mostly because they're worried about people regretting, like, dusting a card, and then once, like, later down the line, if a new format or a new deck pops up that needs that card, they feel bad for the bad player experience of essentially dusting something you don't use at that moment. I still think there's a little bit of pressing a narrative in a basic extent to being like, you know, like we're used to dusting, crafting, and such, while they're trying to use an incident of like destroying your collection and such. Like, you could definitely see a hint of just essentially incentivizing and trying to make that what would be kind of a nice feature sound very inconvenient and such. Like, I could definitely sniff that twist in the tail, let's just put it like that. However, if there is one reason why I think they're going to be really cautious of not trying to do the dusting system and such, it's mostly because I think it's going to be something that if they ever get to a point where they want to do it, it's going to be a very, very significant thing. And what I mean by that is, from what it sounds like when they were talking about their initial design philosophies and such, it sounded like with the wildcard system in general, it wasn't intentionally designed to have a quote-unquote dusting or crafting component. And while many people make the comparisons of, well, Hearthstone does it and Legends of Runeterra does it, one thing you have to keep in mind is that those games originally had the plan of a dusting and crafting system already within their system architecture. They already had it coded, they already had the implementation and the ability to do it, so that they can actually go tweak it and such when it needs to be tweaked, and offer features such as the features we've seen, if a card gets nerfed, we can automatically refund you and such. And it sounds like Arena only has the factor that they can refund you wildcards once a card gets nerfed and such, or more sense gets banned. But it sounds like at least it appears that they don't really have a system to quote-unquote craft and disenchant within their system architecture. And if they were going to implement that, that would be something that would require a whole system overhaul, and I do think with what their current staff is, that would be ridiculously tricky. So I think it's kind of a case that they're kind of in a rock and a hard place. Would they probably want to implement a dusting and crafting system or something to the equivalent? I would say it probably would be a good idea, but they're saying currently at their moment they don't think it's just good within their design philosophy, and while I agree to disagree, I get what they're coming from. And nevertheless, that was kind of the stream. Or there was a bunch of other information and such. Like I said, you can go check the summary and such. I'm wanting to keep this video a little bit short so that the editor doesn't have to edit a 50-minute video or something. I guess my final thoughts of it is, I like the factor that this is a beginning conversation. And that is kind of one of the optimistic things that they said at the beginning of the stream, as well as even the beginning of the article that I'll link down below. This is a beginning. This is something that they know that the solutions are not totally implemented yet. It is something that they're trying to do, and they are stepping with and having the introduction of having the conversation to help better the client for both the player as well as just the clientele kind of scenario. And I appreciate that. I appreciate the fact that they're allowing to start with this conversation. The allow of open information to help better the client and hopefully help it make a better experience for players. The keyword, though, is a start, and I do think the start does have some rough edges, to say at the very least. And I do think there's some approaches that definitely are going to be both praised and criticized of what they said. Without a sweat, you heard my praises and criticisms of what they introduced and such. I think if there's just one thing that I think they do need to emphasize and focus on, is the factor that I guess the one thing that bugged me, and we're going to go back to the wildcard bundle thing with the $50. What bugged the crap out of me of that is that it felt like I said, it just feels, this is a hard one because I really want to choose my words carefully here. I feel like it really is hard for a new player experience. And I don't mean the new player experience that they have within their design. They do definitely have a new player experience and design that is, for the most part, relatively alright design, essentially. It's the starter deck things, essentially then the betterment of your decks when you level up and such, and then you can maybe get considering of buying some booster packs and such and do your collection. That experience, I think is perfectly good. I think can be improved on, but I do think it's alright. I do think, though, a new player experience in the sense of someone that's a somewhat experienced player, I do think that's still a little bit faulty. I do think for people who are experienced within the game, or at least has a moderate experience of knowing how card games, I do think the new player experience is still, in some realms, predatory and such. And the realm of peer pressure of wanting to, oh, I want to play this one deck that's one content creator does, that's so cool. But the factor that if they want to finish the deck, they're either going to open a lot of booster packs or spend $50. And to be frank, as much as many people have been making the joke of, oh, I could spend $50 to do X, Y, and Z, buy, eat, and read, go out for dinner, blah, 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 blah. $50 is ridiculously steep asking cost for essentially for what we know at the current moment is a digital card that essentially is a representation of a card that we can play in this specific client, and we don't have any realms of redeeming it for any other value other than the value of within the game client. $50 is a ridiculously steep price. Now, maybe they're going to consider doing features to make the cards have a lot more value in the future. We don't know yet. Maybe there is going to be some realm of a monetary system that where you can redeem your cards for some realm of teeny little value to essentially accommodate for the fact of collecting them. We don't know yet. It doesn't sound like they're going to work on it, but we really don't know the development pipeline. So, I guess my frustration is it's one of those things where if I had to finalize my thoughts, it's one of those things where I think the news that they had in the stream today was a case of people who already are experienced and, are playing Arena and such. They will not mind essentially keep playing Arena because, oh hey, we have these few beneficial fiends coming along for us to help us still play and maybe even make content for it. Sweet! But I do feel like for new players, the incentive here is not as great as the news. I just feel like it's kind of like one of those where it still feels like there's going to be a high pay gap. And I do feel like, to be fair, they do the starter decks, they do all those things, but I do think for people who are still a little bit above the experience and want to at least play Arena and try out a lot of more kind of like moderate level to maybe intermediate level deck designs, or try brewing at a beginner level and such that is just starting brewing, I still think there's still things that can be improved upon that aspect. I guess that's my perspective. Nevertheless, thanks for everybody who enjoyed this top deck thoughts, I guess. Like I said, it wasn't the funnest thing, but still, it's a beginning discussion, and I appreciate that WotC is willing to have this discussion to help improve the client. So, yeah, I guess that's my top deck thoughts. See y'all later. Bada beep, bada boop.